Hi, Siobhan. Welcome to the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast. Happy to have you here.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here and thanks for having me.
Yes. And I know that you have your own journey through sugar addiction and unlocking your own sugar shackles. So, can you walk us through that? Can you tell us how you got to where you are today?
Yes. So, yeah, I'm a pretty classic sugar addict now that I've learned more about it. Didn't realize it at the time, but it started really, really early for me. Like some of my earliest memories back to like even 4 or 5 years old and getting up before anyone else woke up, sneaking downstairs, climbing onto the kitchen counter to get into the cookie jar that was hidden in the cabinet. And I would just start eating as many cookies as I could, and I'd watch cartoons before anyone else got up. And no one told me like not to do this, right? But I knew even at that age that that wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. And I also say it wasn't like sugar and sweets were really like forbidden in our house. We had like dessert pretty much every night. So I had a lot of access to it. So there was no reason to even hide it at all. But I did that from a really early age where I was eating it and then hiding it. Like my mom would clean my room and find candy wrappers galore that I had stashed. At holidays, I would eat like my Halloween candy and my brothers and my sisters within a few days. Same with like Easter, any kind of holiday, there were like sweets around. So very, very early on, I was never able to eat it in moderation. And it was kind of like a family joke that I was a chocoholic, right? And I just had a sweet tooth. And so for gifts, for birthdays and holidays, people would just give me candy, and I loved it. Like I would just go through this. I remember too, like, they would have those fundraisers where you got those like big size candy bars that you would sell for like $1 or whatever. I would eat the entire box and then have to come up with the money to like pay it back. So again, really, and we kind of just laughed it off like, oh, that's my sweet tooth. But looking back now, I'm like, there were some big red flags really, really early on. And I was very active. I've always been an athlete. So as far as like my weight, I was always still pretty slim until really I hit puberty, like around the 8th, 9th grade, I started gaining weight and time kind of became more self-conscious about what I was eating and what I looked like. And I had a friend that was like making herself throw up, and I tried that once and I was like, this is terrible. Like, that's not going to work for me. So I found that I would like kind of started dieting. It's probably the first time I went on a diet, I would say was somewhere around 9th grade. And of course, it was the low fat time. So it was like low fat, calorie restriction. And of course, I lost weight, doing that. But then it would never last very long where I'd then go and have some kind of binge. So I very early on, I don't know how this is like 14 or 15, started that binge diet cycle that lasted then decades, so very, very early on was dieting and then would do great for a few weeks and then totally fall off the wagon and go completely the other way. Again, I was very active, so I was pretty good. Like my weight didn't yo-yo too much. This went like continued into college. I played field hockey in college, so I was on scholarship and working out a lot. But my weight would kind of start fluctuating, maybe up and down 10 pounds. And then after college, that got up to more like 20 to 30 pounds up and down. And it was something I was really aware of and noticed that other friends of mine didn't have the same problem. They might like to have a treat, but they could stop after one or two, or even to my like total disbelief, not eat it if they weren't hungry. And I'm like, what does hunger have to do with this? Like it was just so, again, thinking there was something different about me, which there was, but I didn't realize it was actual addiction for a long time. So this kind of continued into my 20s. And again, that weight swing started kind of getting higher, especially after I was in the working world and a lot more like sitting a lot more at a desk and not getting that same active exercise that I was getting before. I met my husband in like my 20s, and he had a huge sugar tooth or sweet tooth too. But again, he was one of those people that could take it or leave it. And one of those really defining like aha moments for me was we had made chocolate chip cookies and we had just eaten lunch or something. This is when we were still dating. And he took the cookies out of the oven and I proceeded just to like start downing them, you know, like handfuls at a time, realizing he's not eating any. And I'm like, oh, aren't you going to have any? He's like, oh, I'll have one later. We just ate lunch. You know, I'm not hungry. And again, that whole I'm not hungry thing, I was like, huh, as I'm continuing to eat them. And even when we'd have like these cookies, we'd put some in the freezer. I couldn't rest until all the cookies were gone. So I started kind of hiding that too, again, realizing this behavior was unusual, right? So like he would be like, oh, where did all the cookies go? I'd be like, I have no idea. That's so weird. Where obviously I hate them all, you know? I would, hide, like if I would go through a bag of like M&Ms used to be my big thing. I'd hide those at the bottom of the trash can, you know, that kind of thing. I would easily just stop at the store after work. I could probably spend 20 to 30 bucks on whatever this binge was going to be. And again, there were times when I was eating really well and I was good. And then there's the times that I was really, really bad. It was a very all or nothing mentality. Like if I screwed it up one day, I was like, well, I already messed up today. I might as well go nuts, you know, and then I'll start tomorrow, or it was always tomorrow. Well, that's tomorrow's Saturday. That's not a good day to start. I'll start on Monday. Oh, but on Wednesday is the first of the month. I should start on Wednesday. You know, it was always me kind of pushing the date that I was going to be good again or get back on track. And I really kind of, you know, thought of it as like a switch. I would even try to say this to people. It's like, once that binge switch is on, there was like nothing I could do to resist the compulsion to overeat and binge. And then there would be some reason one day I'd wake up and the switch was off and I was able to kind of get back on track. So in my 20s, I was also diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome, and got off birth control, found that out. And that's when I really started looking at more of a holistic approach. That was kind of the first step. And I went to see a naturopath instead of going to the medical doctor that wanted to put me on metformin or back on the pill. And I just, again, it just didn't resonate. I'm like, there has to be like a more natural way to treat this. So with the help of a naturopath, you know, really kind of introduced me to more clean eating, you know, really whole foods. I started switching like some stuff that I was eating out for organic things. I was eating more, adding more vegetables. I was eating more, you know, healthy protein and really looking at the quality of my meats for the first time, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I was eating a lot better, making some really, really good changes, even looking at what I was putting on my body, like toxic products, cleaning products, what kind of toiletries I was using, you know, skin products, hair, everything. So really kind of deep diving into all of this, but at the same time, still having those binge periods where it was like, you know, everything was off, you know, on again of just eating the worst possible stuff. And this continued, you know, like into my 30s. I had a hard time getting pregnant because of the polycystic ovary syndrome. I had some miscarriages and all of that kind of emotional stuff I really dealt with eating, you know, and I really realized too that I was an emotional eater. So I went and got a lot of help and therapy around binge eating disorder is what I kind of thought I had. So I did a lot of therapy. I tried so many different things. Like if you name it, I've probably tried it, from every diet to every workout program. You know, I was a vegan for a while. I was, you know, did paleo. I did the Whole30. I did CrossFit for a while. I did, you know, Orange Theory fitness. I mean, I tried so many different things. and would always love, like, of course, every birthday wish and New Year's resolution was around losing the weight. Finally, this is the year I'm going to do it. And every time I cracked open a new diet book, which was like so exciting for me, I love just reading, all these diet books. I'd be like, this is the one, this is the answer. I'm going to fix myself, and then of course the cycle of guilt, shame, and everything afterwards, when ultimately it wouldn't work for me. I even tried like hypnosis, all kinds of stuff. And with binge eating disorder and most eating disorders, the treatment is moderation. So I was really trying to moderate. And again, looking back on it now, I know that never works if it's a true addiction. So I spent many, many years kind of frustrated, really wanting to help myself, but unable to do it. It ultimately, my two kids are now 7 and 8. And when they were about, I think like 2 and 3, maybe, I decided to get my health coaching certification through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition in New York City. And really behind that was the desire to fix myself and then be able to help other people. So, I did this program. I really, really loved it, really dived in and tried the raw food diet. We learned all these different diet theories, and I was like all in on all of them and trying all this stuff. But again, they addressed emotional eating, they addressed binge eating disorder, but not sugar addiction itself. So there was this really great speaker around binge eating disorder. So I really focused again. I did sessions with her one-on-one and really focused again on it must be binge eating disorder. And again, not really getting any kind of steady, resolution from it. So I graduated from IIN, and I think, when I think of people ask, like, did you ever hit rock bottom? And I think that what I can really kind of pinpoint rock bottom for me was graduating from IIN and helping. I had a ton of health coaching clients. I was really lucky in that. And I was helping so many other people make these amazing choices for themselves. And it wasn't just about what you eat. It's a lot about lifestyle and meditation and, lowering stress, all the other things. I had all these great resources, right? And all these people are getting so much better, but I still would be like going, after sessions, going and eating like a whole gallon of ice cream or whatever until I felt sick. So I was invited to go to their conference that they hold in New York City every year. And so I went, and it was like 3 days of, it was just so amazing being around all these health coaches and hearing all these speakers that I'd really looked up to, getting all this really good information. But I was in one of those modes where the binge switch was on. So here I am with all of these health coaches. My husband came with me because at night, it was in New York City. So at night we would go and see a show or go out to dinner or whatever. And he would kind of just, while I was in conferences all day, just explore New York. But the first day I remember we went and had like a lunch break, and there was a Whole Foods right nearby. So all these health coaches descended down onto the Whole Foods, which was like hilarious. And I had like my nice lunch, and it was totally should have been satisfying. Right. But because I was in that binge mode, I needed my fix. That's where I really did feel like a drug addict. Like, I need my fix. So I ordered like a cannoli or something, and remember being so embarrassed and ashamed because here I am around all these people that eat really well. And I felt like I had to justify why I'm eating this cannoli. Like, oh, I only eat this once a month when I'm about to get my period. All complete crap. I wasn't about to get my period, but I was just too embarrassed to say, I just need to have this. So I remember eating that. And then even as soon as it ended that day, I stopped at like a Duane Reade, and got like a pharmacy and just got a big bag of M&Ms. And I think just like pounded them down, like I needed that. It was so hard to get through the day without my fix. And so that's how those next 3 days went. So having that experience of it being so amazing on one end, but at the same time being like, what is going on with me that I can't even sit through a day of these this conference without having my, fix. So I got home and felt like really, really depressed after that. And I would say that's kind of was rock bottom. And at the same time, I started being kind of introduced to the idea of sugar addiction and food addiction, but I'd always just didn't want to be addicted. So I was just like, no, that can't be it. So if there was any kind of research out there saying sugar addiction isn't real, everything's about moderation, I would go like, okay, good. Because that's what I want. That's the solution, was moderation. That's what I really wanted to make work. But again, I've tried that for years and years and years. And I even, like, my last ditch effort with that was reading this book, which probably a lot of people have, called Intuitive Eating. And I even worked one-on-one for like 6 months with an intuitive eating counselor, and just did nothing for me. And I think I finally had to surrender. I almost got to a place where I was so desperate that I was like, well, let me look at this sugar addiction thing again. And it just was all the pieces aligning at the right time, as it happens in our life. It just has to come together at the right time. And I read this
ready
article.
To hear it.
Yeah, exactly. And even though I've heard it, this is really a good example. I've maybe heard it other times before, but I needed to hear it again and again, and just at the right way, in the right time, to finally click. And that's what happened. I was reading this article online about food addiction, and it was written by someone that was a recovering drug addict that then turned to food. And it wasn't anything new that I read in there, but just how he said it and receiving it at that time. And, he was really talking about how moderation never works for an addict. Like, you're not going to tell an alcoholic to have like 1 beer a day, right? And same thing with sugar addiction. Like, you have to abstain completely, and you have to abstain from all sugar and all flour, because, even both of those things are kind of, as we know, activate that same reward center. And that just, again, together, I thought, because I've tried to go sugar-free before, but I would substitute with things like with honey or maple syrup, or I'd have a little bit of gluten-free flour. And that only for me must have been triggering me, because then I'd eventually want to eat the real thing. It would only last again for a few weeks. So again, just knowing, okay, I have to give it all up, all flour, all sugar. And then the other thing he said is, like, you need to give it some time. And in my own head, a year came into my head. I'm like, I need to do this for a full year. And this was like 2018 in the fall that I started formulating this plan. And I did not go sugar and flour free until January, like 13th. Or actually, that was just 2018. Sorry. So this was the fall of 2017. So I actually tried. Then it was the holidays, all the things. I'm like, okay, January 1st, 2018. No, January 13th was when it finally happened. But what I had committed to was giving it up for a full year. Because again, I'm like, what else do I have to lose at this point? And learning everything I did with, the health coaching, was like, I knew that these changes can't happen just overnight, and that I had been dealing with this for a really long time. So I couldn't expect like a 30-day cleanse to magically fix me. So I kind of knew that intuitively. And I was also probably at my highest weight at this point too. Is after having 2 kids, and I was pretty big. I don't know the exact amount, because I don't believe in weighing myself. I just think that the number isn't really an accurate portrayal of your overall health. And once I learned that you could turn down being weighed at the doctor's office, like, you can just say no, that was so freeing for me. I haven't been weighed since I had my daughter, who is now 7. So, and I've never had a doctor question me about it. I just want to say that, or a nurse. You can say no. And even when I was at my heaviest, they weren't like, oh no, we need to weigh you. And even now, no one ever says, they're just like, okay. And it was just so freeing for me. So I have no idea how much I weighed, but I know from the way my clothes were fitting and looking in the mirror, I was pretty much, probably at my highest body weight for myself. So I was feeling really, really, again, desperate. So I thought, I'll just give this a year. If it doesn't work, I'll just know it's not, I'll just binge my head off for the rest of my life and just deal with it. But I just wanted this one more chance of really trying to help myself. Of course, a motivation was the kids, and wanting to be like an active mom and wanting to be a good example for them and not give them eating issues. And then also, I think I was like 38 at the time or 37, and just thinking about my 40th birthday and how I wanted to, start that next chapter of my life in a place that I was feeling really good. I wanted to age as gracefully as possible. A lot of that was vanity too. Like, I knew sugar causes a lot of inflammation in the body. I know that it ages you. I know when I thought about menopause and perimenopause, I'm like, that's going to be terrible if I'm eating like this way. So a lot of it motivational was health too, and some vanity stuff. But again, realizing I need to give this a full year. And that's what I did. So starting on January 13th, I just gave up all sugar, all flour, nothing else. That's all I remember telling myself, like, okay, that's going to be hard enough. Don't try to diet on top of that or remove too much stuff. Just start there and see what your body does. And then you can tweak it as you go. I also started writing every single day for an entire year. That first year, I wrote in my journal and talked about like what my experience was, because I had been looking for a book like that. And I found some great books, but nothing that really detailed like the day-to-day experience of what it's like to go off sugar and flour as an addict. So I decided I was going to write this book and then help people in the future. So every single day. And I really think that's the piece that kept me really accountable. I envisioned this audience that was really like counting on me, and it really, really helped keep me accountable. So here I wrote every single day for a year. And I think that really helped keep me going when, of course, with the challenges that arose, but that ended up becoming my podcast. So 1 year in, January 13th, 2019, I went to the beach by myself to just kind of reflect and celebrate my sugarversary, as I call it. And I decided just record my very first podcast episode. And since then, I've been doing it weekly. And it's my way of kind of, this book, because I'm not as much of a writer. I realized when I was trying to edit the book and just all this stuff, it's so much easier for me to speak about it. And so that's what that's what the podcast really, how it started was just wanting me to share my journey. Because again, I'd always told myself, if I help myself, I really wanted to help other people. And that's what I find like the podcast does. And now it's really grown into where I love, like had you on there. I love interviewing people and sharing their experiences and just getting all that different knowledge. Again, with that help of it, something that one of my guests says might resonate with someone listening in a way that finally is that final click for them and their whole puzzle comes together. So that's kind of where I am now. I'll stop because I know that was a lot, but that is how I kind of got off the sugar and flour. And I would say by month 8, I knew there was no going back. Like I knew this was the thing for me. And in the beginning, it was hard. It probably took about 5 months before I even saw any weight loss or anything, but I just kept going, just knowing my body needed more time. And yeah, so by about 8 months, I would say I knew it was by that point too, it was so much easier to abstain completely than the moderation ever was for me. So that's when it kind of all really clicked. And then I knew I really wanted to help other people, find the same freedom, because I really thought it really still feels like a miracle to me.
Wow. That is just an incredible story. And there are certain clients that I have popping into mind, and then even just some aspects that sort of closely mirror my own issues with food. And I'm really happy that you told your story with all that detail, because I think it's really important for people to hear, because it's not talked about very much, honestly. Like you're probably the first person who came on my podcast, and I'm at almost episode 100. talking specifically about food and sugar addiction. And so I highlighted some things when you were talking that I wanted to circle back to, but I love that you talked about how everything was attributed to your sweet tooth and it was laughed off, and it's like, oh, you're a chocoholic. And it's very socially acceptable, right, to have this. However, even though it is socially acceptable to a degree, there was that hiding the wrappers, and that what my mom calls closet eating. And that is something that resonated with me. That was sort of what I had. And I think that my issues are driven more by blood sugar instability than actual food addiction. So that's where you get those parallels. It was more like the binge eating was a reflection of, for me, these swings in blood sugar. And so it can manifest the same way, but there's still a lot of those similar feelings and symptoms. And it's really hard to feel, because that there's a layer of shame, like we're hiding it because we're ashamed. Do you want to speak about that piece a little bit?
Yeah, I was so embarrassed and ashamed, and I felt like I had it together so much in every aspect of my life. Besides that, I'm really a big control freak too. So it drove me crazy that this was like the one area I couldn't have control over. It was very embarrassing for me. I was also the person that would, okay, I'm going to throw out these cookies and brownies because I'm going to be good tomorrow. Tomorrow would come and I'd be digging them out of the trash can and I would still eat them, So really talk about things that are like so embarrassing, but very common for people with addiction, to be doing that type of thing. And like, again, just being able, I would spend the money sometimes that I probably shouldn't have been on these binges. And I think about how much money that I wasted, just on eating on this food. So yeah, there's a lot of shame, a lot of hiding. And again, feeling so alone, that's why I do share my story and why I did decide to do the podcast too, because there's a certain vulnerability around that with sharing that with people. Because I am still like, it's not like I'm like, yeah, isn't that awesome that I used to dig food out of the trash and eat it? Like it's, but I just find that so many people can relate to that. And I felt so alone. I felt like I was the only person in the world that felt like this. And I just don't want anyone else to feel that they're alone. And that's why I kind of share that story. And I realize now that I wasn't at all. And so many people can relate. But when you're in it, it just feels so heavy. And you really, like for me, I was just so upset with myself, just so much self-hate, of like, what is wrong with you? I would just beat myself up so much. Where now I don't do that at all. And for the first time in my life, even though my body's not perfect, I mean, I had 2 kids and C-sections, but at the same time, I'm so much more comfortable in my body. And I can say for the first time, I love and accept myself exactly as I am. And I really mean it. Where before, I would try to say that and mean it, and I just didn't. And now I really, really do. So, and the other thing is just the shackles, when you say unlock the sugar shackles, it is like being in jail when you're addicted, or if you're stuck, like you were saying, in that, with your mood swings, with your blood sugar swinging around, it really feels like you're shackled and in jail. It's like this mental warfare game too, of every single day. I can't even tell you how many hours were wasted of what I was going to eat, what I wasn't going to eat that day, if I was going to be good, if I was going to be bad. And now when I look back on that, I get so mad, because I think how many women are like this, especially, like spending so much time worrying about what we're going to eat, what diet, how we look, when we could be putting our thought and energy into such bigger things, And so I think about that a lot, because that to me is my number one benefit. It isn't the weight loss, which I thought would be. It's really that freedom in my mind and the mental clarity and the freedom now that I have to think about other things and do other things and be really present with people. That's another huge gift. I used to be like, hey, Danny, let's go out to eat. I could care less about what you were talking to me about. I would just be thinking about what I was going to eat on the menu. Where now, if we go out to dinner, I am totally focused. Like the food is just like an after, it's not even, it's just part of it, but it's not the whole focus. So there's so much freedom in that too. I just feel like I can be a lot more present with my kids, with my family, with my friends, with myself. And then I have all this extra time and energy now to put towards things that I want to, like bigger things in the world than just what I'm going to eat or not eat, and not like really beat myself up about how I look. So I think that's something really to mention too for people, is just how much time, when you really think about it, stop and think about it. How much time have you spent worrying about what you look like, how much you weigh, all these things that we just put so much energy into?
Yeah, that's such a good point. So I want to talk about that mental chatter, but first because it's a safe space, and because you just said that, you were digging through the trash for cookies and brownies. And I also have my own similar story of that. I used to work at kids' birthday parties, and I would clean my cousin Brian and I worked together. And after the kids would eat their like cake and pizza, they would go to a pool, and I would have my cousin, I would ask him to lifeguard at the beginning, and I would do the cleanup so that I could eat the leftovers. So if there were, and this is my like trash equivalent, is that sometimes if there was a cupcake on a kid's plate and it looks like they didn't touch that cupcake, because we all know that sometimes that didn't happen. They were probably breathing on it. They could have sneezed on it. I ate that sometimes. And like, that's my equivalent of like, wow, that, all the shame and embarrassment of, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I needed that fix that badly. And I do have that. And, talking about it wasn't easy for me to talk about. Like, I didn't talk about this stuff at the very beginning of when I first started doing this, but I think it's really valuable to show that we are not alone, and like, it's not just us. And also that these foods are designed to be super addicting. We're not having this issue with steak and broccoli. We're not. It's all these foods that are made to be hyper palatable in a factory. And even the way our fruit has been bred over time to be more sweet. There's cotton candy grapes. Like if you've ever seen like an old carrot or an old piece of corn, like from centuries ago, I mean, it was like a root, like you pull up a plant and the root, like you couldn't eat it. It wasn't sweet, but we have even bred our produce to have more sugar. So as humans, we're designed to seek out sugar. And then some people, it's just, it gets switched on or whatever that is. But I loved how you talked about that. The benefit for you was reducing what I call this mental chatter, what I call my sugar dragon. It's like chats with my sugar dragon. I walk into Whole Foods, and back in the day, it would be like, okay, you can get one piece of chocolate, but nothing too big, because you'll eat the whole thing. And so like, maybe you should get this, or this has the mental space that when it silences. So that's why for me, I love when my blood sugar is stable and I'm, doing a ketosis or carnivore, and all of a sudden that chatter just disappears. It's like, it's beautiful. It's peace that you experience, and you're not having to debate with yourself, just one more bite or this one more thing, because that is really, like you said, we could be putting our thought and energy into so much more productive things than thinking about this minutia of like, what am I going to eat? Should I eat one more bite? Did they see me take one of these? Are other people taking, seconds? I mean, this is all stuff that I'd be calculating, and I'm sure that resonates with you too. Yeah.
100%. I would, even when I was shopping, I just realized I would go and get like these really good chocolate chip sea salt cookies. And that was always like my treat. I'd go and eat like 3 of those. And I sometimes wouldn't pay for them. That's like another thing because I was too embarrassed. I mean, they were like 99-cent cookies, but I was like too embarrassed to be like, sorry, I ate all 3, So again, when you think about that kind of behavior, that really shows the addictive behavior. And like you said, just how badly you want your fix, that you're willing to do that.
Yeah. And so when you were talking, I wrote that you ended up sort of talking about it and sort of answering my question, but I wanted to dive into this a little bit more. So mainstream dietitians who are, RDs, what they're taught, and we have to keep in mind the funding for their schooling is coming from, and this is public information, I'm not making this up, this is not a conspiracy. It's coming from big, giant processed food companies, which of course want you to keep eating their processed foods because they want to make money. It's a business, right? And so they'll say like, oh, everything in moderation is fine. So just have a 6-ounce glass of Coca-Cola and a fun size Snickers because there's no such thing as a bad food. Let's not label food as good or bad, and let's everybody eat in moderation. And tell us why this is, to me, I feel like this is a harmful message to a lot of people because they can't do that. So they think they're a failure. But why do you think this doesn't work? And what's the harm in this and this intuitive eating? Like, oh, just eat intuitively.
Like that sounds wonderful in theory, right? I mean, that's why I was like, oh, I would love to be able to do that. And there are some people that can eat in moderation and that works for them. And I think that's great. But the problem where it's harmful is there's so many people that don't fall into that category and therefore are really, really struggling with all these issues. And they're trying to seek out help. Like that's how I feel. I feel so sad looking back for myself sometimes of how much I wanted to help myself, how I really tried to get the help but no one could give me the help that I needed because they were following that whole model. Like I did see a nutritionist and a dietitian, and yeah, like you were saying, it wasn't anything that was really specific for me either as an individual. It's just all this generic information. So I do find it really, really harmful for those people that really have even any kind of sensitivity to sugar. Because again, they're trying to do something that's not going to help them. And then what does that look like? Then you're beating yourself up. Oh, it must be me. I'm doing something wrong, where I say, no, that was the system there was wrong for you. That's not your fault. But so many of us feel like it's our fault. We beat ourselves up, and then it just gets us deeper into that rut of guilt, shame, and just feeling like giving up. Like, there is something wrong with me. It's the whole reason too, that I really, really hope, and they're working toward this, on getting sugar addiction medically recognized. Because again, they're missing out. So many people that need that help and that information aren't getting it because it's not available right now. And that to me is why it's really, really important, so that someone like me can get the help 20 years. I could probably gotten that help 20 years earlier than I did, and so to me, I feel, and we're getting there, I'm so happy that more people are talking about this, and especially for children, having 2 little kids, it's really hard for me. I battle this all the time of like, okay, I don't want to be like too crazy, but I also can't just accept that, yeah, all foods there's no bad foods, because there are, and so I do talk to my kids about that. And just try to give them as much education and information as I can, and tell them, you guys are going to be in charge of feeding yourselves. I just want to give you this information. I want you to help start paying attention to how you feel after you eat certain foods, and helping them make that connection too. And also not rewarding or bribing with food. That's really, really something that's important to me, because so many of us learn, even if we're not addicted, but so many of us still, like during COVID, so many people were looking for comfort in food or alcohol or anything to kind of numb themselves, because that's kind of what we were taught, Or if you have something really great going on, you celebrate and go out and get ice cream. So I'm trying to do that really differently with my own kids, and really looking at some of those, like, the behavioral stuff and just the cultural stuff too, that's been ingrained in us. But it really is hard some days, because you're going against the flow, you're really going against everyone else. But I think the more people that can talk about it and share about it, and the more, like, we'll make it more normal, so that you won't feel like, you go to a party like, oh yeah, I don't eat sugar or flour. If someone again, like in the beginning, like you were saying, I didn't share a lot. Now I'm like, yeah, I don't eat sugar and flour. And so I get a lot of conversations from, out of that. But I will say more and more people are like, oh, good for you. That's great. Not like, really? Well, what do you eat then? Don't you need sugar? So there is, I feel like, a little bit of this change happening, but we still have a while to go. But I do think that, again, intuitive eating, moderation does work for some people, but we need a system that educates, the full picture for the people that doesn't work for.
Absolutely. So I think that's a great thing that you're doing with your own kids without trying to not reward and bribe with food. And I understand that if you think about every holiday, every special occasion, like you said, let's go get ice cream. Let's go get a slice of pizza. It's your birthday. Let's have cake. So it's so ingrained in so many aspects of our culture. And I could see that could be difficult. So what are, maybe to offer parents some alternatives, what are some things that you've done that with your kids that has been an alternative to sugary foods?
Well, one thing that I love to share about is like for Halloween, for instance, it's so funny. Like my kids love dressing up and trick-or-treating, not necessarily eating the candy, like they just have so much fun getting dressed up and collect, like going door to door. So very early on with them, we started what's known as the switch witch. So the night of Halloween, I let them pick, like at first, seriously, just one piece of candy each. Now they're a little bit bigger. I might let them pick 2 or 3 pieces of candy, and then they can have that candy. And then the rest of the candy, we put like in a bag or a box and leave that out overnight for the switch witch. And then the switch witch just comes, takes the candy away, and in the place leaves like book or toys, other stuff for the kids. And they get so excited about this. Like, so now when we trick or treat, they're like, "Ooh, the switch witch is going to love all this candy that we're getting," So that's something that's worked really well. And even at 7 and 8 and them being in school and realizing not everybody else does that, sometimes they'll ask me like, "Oh, well, so-and-so gets to eat all their candy." And I'm like, "Oh, that's great. That must be what their family does. Our family doesn't do that." So I'm just very clear with like some family, and that's fine, but this is what our family does. And it might be a little bit different, but, I'm like, we're really trying to be healthy. And, so they really are good about that. I also, make sure, and it's so tempting. I've wanted to do it sometimes, I'll be in the grocery store and I see parents like just kids on verges of meltdown. So they're giving them candy, food, lollipops, whatever, just to like, and I get it because I've been there and I've been tempted, to be like, just put a lollipop in that mouth. But I really am like, nope, can't do it. So it's like kind of taking the time, even though it's really hard to do some of that hard parenting in the moment when we just want it to stop, but instead just kind of accepting that that's where they are and letting them just kind of express the emotion without trying to stop it. So, and that's really hard, I will bribe with screen time. I will say that, or other things like that aren't food. It's really hard to get away without bribing. Let's just face it. But like I'll bribe with, because we don't do a lot of screen time either. So that's really a kind of, oh, you guys, maybe we could watch like a 20-minute show and then, so that works really well for my kids because they don't have a lot of screen time. So they're really motivated by that. Or sometimes it might be too, like they really like going to like a park nearby, like then whatever, it's kind of something that works for your kids. Every kid is motivated a little differently, but I kind of know the things that my kids really like to do. So we kind of focus on those, like in more experiences than like, the food itself. And then when we go on vacation and stuff, like, it's not like we are in vacation mode and eat a bunch of junk. No, it's just like we would normally eat, like they did a camp out recently with friends and they had a s'more and that was fine. But when we go camping, we don't always have s'mores. So again, sometimes we might have those things, or sometimes we might go to the movies and have popcorn, but not every single time. So I try to like kind of show that balance, and I'm also very aware of making sure they're not eating when they're watching TV, because that's another thing I hear so many clients and myself really struggle at night. We know we're not hungry, but it's like you're watching TV and you just want to like mindlessly eat. And I'm like, where does that, where we actually obviously learned that somewhere. So I'm really careful with my kids about that too. We eat first. And then if we are going to watch something, that's like a separate thing. We're not eating. Again, once in a while, we might do popcorn while we're watching, but not every single time. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Great tips. So I have a few questions for you about the specifics of what you personally do. So you say no sugar, no flour. And so I assume that means like no honey, no sugar in any of its forms, right? But does that include things like popcorn or oatmeal or rice or sweet potatoes, any of those whole food carbohydrates or fruit?
Yes, that's a great question, and stuff that people ask me all the time. And this is where I'm going to say, like, what works for me doesn't work for everybody. And my whole group coaching program, I do group coaching around sugar addiction. And the only things that we do is no sugar, no flour. The rest of it is kind of experimentation of what works for you as an individual. Because if you're trying to do exactly what I do or exactly what someone else does, it's not going to be sustainable. And I really struggled with that in the beginning. I'm like, just do no sugar, no flour. Oh my gosh, but that person isn't eating grains and they don't eat corn and they don't eat sweet potatoes. And then I'd be like, and then I would start trying to do that. But then the more I deprive myself, the more I was triggering myself. So for me, I can eat some of those things, but it's funny because now in January, will actually be 5 years since I've been doing this. So it's changed so much throughout that journey, I want to say too. You know, now that I'm entering that time this year, I'm really more experimenting with not really eating I used to do a lot of like tortilla chips. Again, as long as it didn't have flour or sugar in the label, I would eat it. And there are some tortilla chips that say corn flour. I wouldn't do those, right? Or some that have added sugar. Same with popcorn. I would do popcorn with like butter on it or ghee or something. But now I haven't been doing that as much, maybe very like once in a while. I do still eat sweet potatoes, but again, I seem to tolerate them okay. I know you're a big, big fan of the continuous glucose monitor. I've done that, and it's been really fun to see. Oh, she's got hers on right now. I love it. So I have been loving to do that. And then I did like, a month of, okay, what does the sweet potato do? And the only thing that spiked me, and I was wouldn't normally eat an apple by itself anyway, but I was just curious. I was experimenting. I ate an apple by itself and it went, total spike, just an apple by itself, where the next day I had it with some like nut butter and it just gave like a little spike, like not nearly like the day before. So I think experimenting, I'm always hesitant to say exactly what I eat because you really have to pay attention to that for yourself. And what I tell people, like I can eat nuts. I know a lot of people that can't. I've never overeaten nuts, but if you all of a sudden are like obsessed about nuts, or oatmeal is another one. I don't eat oatmeal, but I don't really even want it. But I know some people that are like, I just want my oatmeal. I look forward to eating it every day. And I'm like, that's your signal. If you're really obsessed, compulsed about it, it's probably triggering something in you. So you need to let it go. And that's how I really work with my group coaching, is like, we kind of identify those things that are a little different for everybody. And I just want to say, it's obviously going to evolve throughout your, like what works for you today isn't going to work for you tomorrow. So really being open and paying attention, I have found, like, to see, because I have felt a lot of changes just in these 5 years. So
yeah, that's great to know. And I tell my coaching students all the time that for me, when I was starting keto, I struggled with cravings, and the cravings sometimes led to binges, but not as often, because I was eating a little bit higher fat. So I think I was more nourished than I was in the 90s when I had like, one English muffin for breakfast with jelly on it. And then I had like a low fat yogurt and a low fat granola bar for lunch. I came home and I was actually also like starving, because that's just what the diet was at the time. And I was also super, super hungry. So as I was more nourished and I was doing this, I was eating more paleo. I would still have some binges, but I always struggled with cravings. So then when I went keto, I couldn't get rid of my cravings because they just would transmute to whatever I was eating. So if I ate raspberries, it was like, oh, raspberries are quote unquote keto. So I'd eat them. And then I'm thinking about chocolate. I'm like, okay, I can't have raspberries. I made fat bombs and they had artificial sweeteners, which didn't spike my blood sugar, but totally woke up my sugar dragon. I can't even have electrolytes with an artificial sweetener because the second it hits my tongue, my body's like, get me more sugar right now. So I can't have those. So I had to cut those out. Then I was making fat bombs that were just like coconut butter and peanut butter and unsweetened chocolate. Still, the idea that it was kind of like a candy, I would be driving home from work thinking about how many fat bombs can I have? Can I have just one? Maybe how many are left? Can I save one for after dinner? Like totally taking over my mind. So I had to take away everything that had even remote sweetness and then also starches. They just drove me. I would eat oatmeal. It could be totally unsweetened. I would eat a potato and my mind just went to, now I'm thinking about sugar. And so I had to cut out all those things, even though that, if I was eating just a small amount, it would still be considered ketosis. I had to totally personalize it to me in order to get rid of my cravings, which was my biggest thing. I just really wanted to get rid of that. So somewhat
I love
similar
that.
to what you're saying.
And that's so well explained on how you have to really individualize it for you, even though, yeah, you could be wearing your continuous glucose monitor. It's not even spiking you those artificial sweeteners, but you're starting to get the cravings again in your head. And that's really what you have to pay attention to. I love that you said that. And that's different for everybody. And that's why you can't be like, well, that's what Danny does. That's what I'm going to do. No, you really have to see, because it's really a little bit different for everybody. I was going to say too, with like rice, I do eat like rice and quinoa again, once in a while, because I don't have any kind of like reaction to it. But again, I could care less if I have it or not. So again, if I was like, oh my gosh, I have rice every, like I'm looking forward to, like, that's when that probably
that's my wife, by the way,
right.
with the rice. That's like totally her. She is like a riceaholic. So
oh, really?
Yeah. And like certain people have different things, right? Like you could take or leave the
Exactly.
rice. I don't digest it well and it gives me cravings. And for her, she's like, I could eat rice every meal, every single day for the rest of my life and be happy. So it's like, that would be, she doesn't struggle with these addictions like we're talking about, but that is that signal to you like, hey, this is worth looking at. Like, is it something that you feel like you can't live without? Then you probably need to, and you'll probably surprise yourself that you can live without it and you might be better for it. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And just listening to that with your own body. And I think that's easier to do as that mental chatter goes away and dissipates, that's why I say in the beginning, it was still really hard but now I'm just so much more in tune with my body and really see right away the impact of what I eat and how I feel afterwards. So I can make adjustments very quickly.
Yeah. So we are rounding out on almost an hour here, and we didn't get to talk about the emotion code or the body code yet. So maybe we could make that into a part 2. So maybe we'll stop here. And why don't you tell us where we could find you and find your work, and if someone is relating to this food and sugar addiction, where they could start working with you?
Yeah. So you can find me on my website, which is www.unsweetenscio.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook too. The links are there. And I do offer the group coaching. And then, I would love to come back and talk, because we didn't even get to it, but I do think this part of the story is so important for people. But I have all kinds of tools that have really helped me on this journey, and the emotion code and body code are such big tools that have really helped me deal with the emotional stuff that has come up since being sugar and flour free, and how to really process and deal with emotions instead of just eat about them. So we'll get into that in part 2, but thanks so much for letting me just share, in detail the rest of my story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for being here and for sharing and being so honest and vulnerable, because I think it's really going to help a lot of people connect and see their own stories. So thank you so much.
Thank you.